Once again, thank you so much for joining us for this, our last program in the Camden Public Library's Maritime Month program series. And I'd like to thank our Maritime Month sponsor, Camden River House Hotel and Inn. Okay, so we have a very special guest here tonight, pirate reenactor and author, Greg Latimer. So let's learn a little bit about Greg Latimer. Okay, so Greg is a research director for MysteriousDestinationsMagazine.com, an online publication that explores mysteries in the US and Caribbean, and the marketing director for Red Cloak Tours in Maine, where he also guides maritime tours. Latimer worked as a pirate reenactor in Maine, firing cannon, black powder small arms, and he's going to show us some of that tonight, participating in sword fights and sailing armed vessels, giving him a sense of piracy that is up close and personal. Latimer's books, Haunted Damariscotta and Ghosts of Boothbay Region, were previously published by History Press Arcadia Publishing. But what we are here tonight to discuss is his book about pirates of coastal Maine and lost treasure. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to our guest tonight, Greg Latimer. So Greg, go ahead and unmute yourself and take it away.
Well, hello, Julia, and thank you for that nice introduction. As Julia said, there'll be questions at the end of this. I love questions. I like them better than getting presentations, so feel free to send them her way. And if I look like I'm speeding along sometimes with this presentation, I am, because I want to make sure we have enough time at the end of it for presentations. Now, pirates in Maine. Who ever thought there would be pirates in Maine? That was one of the little twists of this book. The publisher had a hard time believing it too. But very much like today's seasonal visitors, pirates were sort of the same way. Imagine you're capering in the Caribbean as a pirate, and here comes summer. Well, all of a sudden, the Caribbean isn't too comfortable anymore. There's no air conditioning on your pirate ship. There's hurricanes that blow through, and there's no prey down there because no one else is sailing out of fear for the hurricanes and things like that. So many pirates would make a migration from the Caribbean area up along the east coast of America. Some of them would stop at places like Rhode Island. Block Island was sort of the auction block of the area at that time, and nobody cared where the items came from. And spend the summer in places like New York, or go all the way up and raid the shipping fleets, the French shipping fleets in Newfoundland. There isn't a lot of record of this. Why? Because pirates didn't like logs. They didn't like to talk about where they were going. There was usually an unwritten article on many pirate ships, and in some cases, the articles were written out. But any man caught writing something down, it would be posted on the mainmast. So writing stuff down and recording history was very discouraged. It's one of the reasons that pirate logs are very hard to find, if at all, from this time period. Now, we didn't have a lot of witnesses, as I just mentioned, but we do have at least one historical reference that's been well documented by Ken Kinkor, who's the head researcher, or was, for the Witta Pirate Museum in Providence, Rhode Island, or correction, the Witta Pirate Museum in Massachusetts. It used to be in P-Town. And that's very well documented, based on, of all things, insurance accounts from ships that were taken by Black Sam Bellamy and his fleet of ships. And he had a fleet of about 5 ships when fall came, or when summer came. It was April 1717. And they were all going to head north, and they needed a place to meet. And where did they choose? They chose Damaris Cove Island, right here off of Lincoln County. And it's just indicative of the fact that a lot of pirates knew where Damaris Cove was. A lot of pirates were already familiar with the coast of Maine. And there's a little bit of factual evidence to shed some weight on that. In fact, islands that were popular with pirates that we'll hear about along the coast of Maine were not just Damaris Cove, but also Monhegan, and down further south, Richmond Island. That was because these islands were offshore, so you had a little protection from the Native Americans if they got cross with you, and you had fresh water on these islands. So you can see that pirate migration on the way back down in the fall. In the springtime, they would or excuse me, on the way back down southbound, after the season was over, they would take more English shipping that was starting to come in from Europe. All the sailing was seasonal as well. So all this worked out pretty well for the pirates. Are we ready to go over to shared screen, Julia?
Sure, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Just down to the little green button.
Okay. They're too good with some of these fanciful machines here.
Oh, it's perfect.
Okay, let's start with Maine's first pirate, known to many of you already. Julia, the advance isn't working on this.
Okay, if you go down to the...
Make sure we're good. Okay, Maine's first known pirate of English descent, because there were probably always some French people that were running around as pirates. Where there is an ocean, there will be pirates. Maine's first pirate was known as Dixie Bull. And Dixie Bull was actually a tanner or furrier from London who decided that he could make a mint by sailing to the Americas in the early 1600s with a load of, well, probably trinkets and things like that to trade with the Indians. And he would trade for furs and get them at a really great cost, and then be able to go back to England and make clothing and other items with them. And of course, he would, by eliminating any middleman, he would drive down his costs and would be well off. There's enough known about Dixie Bull so that we knew he existed, or we know he existed, but a whole lot of the Dixie Bull stuff is legend. This is author James Nelson portraying Dixie Bull, as he used to do every year, over at Fort Williams. You can see the rebuilt Fort Williams in the background. It wasn't there when Dixie Bull came and raided Pemaquid. But Jim did a great imitation or interpretation of Dixie Bull and things he did. What we do know for sure about Dixie Bull is that he existed, number one. Number two, he did in fact raid the colony at Pemaquid in 1632, making off with who knows what. I'm not sure what they had other than dried fish and some powder and ball. I don't think these people were carrying a lot of cash or anything like that. While he was rowing back out to his ship, someone from the shore fired a musket shot in his direction and killed his first mate, which caused his people to row a little bit harder. And then there's one more mention of him in the historical record in a newspaper, that he was seen in the area off the coast of Salem, Massachusetts, also in the 1600s. There was a lot of people believe there's a possibility that he buried treasure on Rutherford Island. Excuse me, I used Richmond Island earlier on that. It should have been Rutherford. Down off of Cape Elizabeth. There was some treasure found there in a little pot, some coins and things like that. The coins, which are actually at the Maine State Historical Society Museum, date in the same era that Dixie Bull would have been active. However, there was a trader on that island as well, and the trader didn't always get along so well with the Native Americans. And one day they came over and killed him. Most people feel that the items that were found on Rutherford probably belonged to him. That was his stash. And it was recovered, I believe, in the 1800s by some lucky person. One of the main reasons Dixie Bull wouldn't have been the person to leave those items is the guy was broke already. He became a pirate and was raiding shipping because he was already broke. Now, how did that happen? Now we get back into the legendary part of it all. As when Dixie Bull sailed out here, allegedly, some French pirates found his little boat, raided it, took all of his goodies, left him with pretty much nothing but the ship and a sword, perhaps. And so he decided that he would in turn raid French shipping and try to make up for his losses and then buy his furs and head back to London. He couldn't find any French ships. So finally he decided he would raid any kind of shipping, including English, which led to the raid in Pemaquid. The raid in Pemaquid is immortalized in a ballad in which Dixie Bull and a fisherman named Daniel Curtis fight a dramatic sword fight. Here's an illustration of it. This is from the book cover. The illustration is by Glenn Chadbourne, who's Steve King's illustrator. Once again, fanciful. The kind of ship that's in the background, probably not around in the 1600s in that kind of style. The fort house certainly weren't there. And this is on Beaver Island, which is just a little ways, and in fact does exist. And as the ballad goes, Dixie Bull and the brave fisherman Dan Curtis fought it out for the fate of the colony of Pemaquid, and Dan Curtis prevailed with his sword and killed Dixie Bull. Once again, all fantasy, but it's been repeated so many times, people tend to believe it. Here's what was really happening out in Pemaquid, and not very glamorous. These are some reenactors over at the state site there. And they're obviously cleaning and mounting cod. And this is basically what the whole station at Pemaquid was about. The living conditions, pretty basic. I don't know how many of you have been to the colonial Pemaquid site, but if you haven't been, you should go. And if you've gone, you should probably go again. There's a whole bunch of great little structures there, old basements. And you can see that the people lived in very, very tight conditions in all kinds of Maine weather over the winter. And it probably wasn't the most comfortable of existences. Okay, on to the next slide here shows a vessel called a Pink. And this is what's left of a Pink that sunk probably in the late 1700s off York County. And every time there's a super low tide, the remains are revealed here. Looking at this, and you're looking at the stern is down in the lower right-hand corner. That's the rudder there, and then forward up to the bow. This was a pretty standard sized merchant vessel for those days, and pirates would capture merchant vessels like this and use them for raiding. So unlike the movies, the pirate ships were not big, elegant ships full of guns. Oftentimes they were little ships like this Pink, maybe with 4 guns, and they would have a large crew so they could scare the merchant people into surrendering. On this map, we see the area of Machias, where there was a fair amount of activity of all kinds. Pirates, privateers. Privateers were like licensed pirates. They were licensed by a state to go prey upon another state or country. And then military occupation. At one point, this area was occupied by the French military, and then almost by the Dutch for a short period of time. So you had just a lot of activity going on here. Let me move this toolbar a little bit here, if I can. Okay, and these numbers here, what do they represent? Up there, number 1, that's where present-day Machias is. And one of the things I should say about present-day Machias in this map is things change over time. So this may not have been the terrain that people were looking at in the 1600s and 1700s, which is the period we're talking about. But it's the best we have to go on right now. And I'll tell you, of all the places in Maine, if there is any place with possible hidden pirate treasure, Machias is probably that place. I was up there on a research assignment for the Whittam Museum in Massachusetts with a letter of bona fide and a lead from a guy who claimed to have treasure from Black Sam Bellamy, who he said created a cache up there in Machias. And there are a lot of rumors about him being there, but there's no good documentation of it. A lot of people think that another pirate named Oliver Labute, or Oliver Levasseur, also known as Labuse, was the actual pirate that was there and not Black Sam Bellamy. But either way, once I got up there, the fellow refused to share information with me because Ken Kinker at the museum believed that Black Sam Bellamy didn't make it to Machias. And so he didn't want to share it all. But having been an investigator, I got to tell you, when you get to a location and your witnesses are getting cold feet at the last minute, it usually means that they weren't being quite completely candid with you to start with. But so we started exploring Machias, and everyone from the Historical Society to the local college to other treasure hunters to waiters and waitresses, we tell the people we're historians, we tell the people we got a letter of bona fide from the museum, and they all thought we were treasure hunters. So it's just, it's sort of an open secret that every other person's a treasure hunter in this neighborhood. So number 2 on the map here shows a Narrows that I visited on the upper part of the river here. This is a very easily defended location. A couple of guys with small arms, or if you could ship a cannon up there, could easily seal off that location right there. So that's important. We'll mention that a little bit more later. And then number 3 over there is Machias Bay, obviously. Number 4 might be a place where treasure is still hidden. It's called Starboard Cove. Most people believe it's called that because as you're exiting the bay, it's on the right or starboard side of the ship. And there was a fellow here named Harry Thompson, who was a privateer and a pirate for a great many years, and really kept his activities on the low profile here in the local area. In fact, most of his family didn't know what he was up to. He is said to have capered for about 11 years, collected a large amount of treasure, with that treasure being buried where he had a farm over here near Starboard Cove. As he grew older, he wanted to pass on the treasure to his family, but he didn't want to make it easy for them. He wanted to make it a challenge. He wanted them to earn the treasure. So he let it be known that he had left various cryptic marks on trees and rocks and things like that in the neighborhood. And several generations of his family went through trying to find that treasure. And according to most reports, were never able to find it. So there may be quite a lot of treasure still buried in the Starboard Cove area. I don't know if you can really get to it or not, but in terms of an actual treasure tale, that one may be real. It may be noteworthy here to mention that most pirates didn't bury treasure. That's just sort of a thing that was started with the book Treasure Island. Pirates that did bury treasure were people like Mr. Thompson here, who didn't have a bank, didn't have a safe place to put his treasure. And just like the little pot of stuff found on Rutherford Island, that's how people kept their savings. Other pirates that had a lot of loot might have buried their treasure in some places, but most pirates collected the treasure from a run lasting a year or two, shared it out with the crew, everyone went and partied, and then they had to go do another pirate trip. So another one here on 5, when you talk about a little pot of goodies, is you look in the upper part of the map at 5, that's Simpson Island. Actually, you can see it from Route 1 as you go through the neighborhood. And in the 1960s, a group of intrepid folks, I'm not sure if they were treasure hunting or not, did locate a kettle filled with coins and jewels and some other things. And they sort of disappeared from the record after that. They didn't donate their items to a museum or anything, so it's a little unverified, but that's a pretty strong story over there in the Machias area. Number 6 is Renshaw Point. And as you can see, that's just a little bit upriver from the narrows I described earlier. A majority of locals that believe in the Bellamy story believe that Bellamy, and I believe it could have been some other pirate, having walked this area and explored this area, this would be a perfect place to do this kind of thing, created a cache and stored treasure in this area. It would have been logical. It was a good, easily defensible place. You had water on 3 sides as a buffer against Native American attacks. You had the Narrows on the other side as a buffer against anyone coming upriver and trying to attack you. So it was a good place to do that kind of thing. Pirates did have military minds, and they probably would have thought that way. And last but not least is Brother Island, number 7, which is down at the very bottom of the screen. And this location is probably more legend than fact. But there were 2 brothers that resided at the island. They were said to be piratical, and they were said to have left a hoard of treasure on the island. Once again, pretty strong evidence for Starboard Cove. We know somebody found some treasure up at Renshaw Point, or excuse me, up at the island there. And which is a lot more than you get in most places for pirate treasure. So if you want to have a nice time walking around, checking out the views, looking for a little treasure, this place is definitely the place to go. And Julia, my slideshow seems to have stopped on me. Hang on a second. I'm having my technician come along and take a look at this.
All right. Okay.
And in Machias, one of the places, or one of the pirates that was thought to have frequented the area, Oliver Levasseur, was also known as Labuse or Labuse. We're not sure which it was. The difference is being called someone with a big nose or a buzzard. But Oliver Levasseur was quite a pirate. He was a career pirate. He went all over. He ended up in the Seychelles, thought he was going to retire, had forgotten that he'd sunk the annual supply ship to the Seychelles back when he was pirating. But the people on Seychelles didn't forget at all. And they promptly arrested him and hung him. He created a couple of cryptic and coded messages, this being one of them. Whoops. And that being another one. Told people that these, if they cracked the code, they could find out where his treasure was hidden. I have a feeling it was one of his last laughs, because no one's ever really been able to crack the code and no one's ever been able to find any treasure. And some people just think they're completely fake, which I don't necessarily disagree with. Okay, shown here is just an example of a golden cross studded with jewels. And this helps us illustrate a story that ends up in Morse Cove on the Kennebec River, in which the pirate Blackbeard Roberts, who was very successful and raided for quite a number of years and took over 450 ships in his career. And because of that amount of treasure on board, probably did bury treasure in various locations in West Africa, the Caribbean. He also came by Maine a couple of times on his way up to raiding the French fishing villages in Nova Scotia. He was known in battle to wear this golden cross studded with jewels. And then our story begins, and believe me, I've abbreviated the whole thing about Blackbeard Roberts. There's a lot about him in the book. It ends with a fellow named Richard Kennedy, who was on his crew when his ship was finally taken by the English Navy. Roberts had a standing order. If he was to be killed in battle, his body, and he would dress in all of his finery with his golden cross and jewels, all of that was to be thrown overboard so it couldn't be captured by the English or whoever was taking them. And then you'll now hear a story about how this golden cross worn by Blackbeard Roberts may have ended up here in Morse Cove in the Kennebec River. Richard Kennedy saw Roberts fall and went over there and remembered his captain's orders, but decided the cross looked so good that maybe he'd keep that. So it is said that he grabbed the cross, hit it with his belongings, threw the Bartholomew Roberts overboard, and then ended up negotiating a deal with the English captors that he would lead them to Roberts' various treasures in the Caribbean and elsewhere in exchange for, number one, not being hung, and number two, a percentage of the take. So that led to Kennedy doing this for a number of years. It's not well recorded, and that's probably on purpose. And then, according to these sources, there's several of them in writing, Kennedy bought a sloop down south, probably in Florida. He had 4 boxes of treasure, which would include the jewels, the gold cross, coins like these the Spanish, what are called Spanish dollars or pieces of 8. And the boxes were not incredibly big. They were kind of shoebox sizes. They were easy to transport. 4 of them loaded into a sloop, and he headed up to Booth Bay Harbor, Maine. He stayed there for a little while, but was just bored to death. There was no place to put all his treasure, and he basically had to sit at home and watch it. So finally, he decided he was going to bury it. He put the treasure in his sloop. He headed out, took a river, likely the Kennebec, up, and made it up into the southern Kennebec, where he reached a location that he described as a small bay. In checking the modern day map of the lower Kennebec, you can see I have circled here Morse Cove. It's the only location I could find that would be described as a small bay on the Kennebec River, which I thought was very interesting. I'm sort of doing a connect the dots investigation follow-up on this story. And Richard Kennedy ended up returning to England, where he was allegedly hung. He made a map and a description of the area, but he didn't use any names on it. He just had an X on this parchment map, and it showed the coastline. And if you didn't know the coastline well enough, you wouldn't know what the rivers were. And then along with that, he had a little bit of a narrative that said, in essence, stand abreast Quartz Boulder, bring top in line with hill north 1/2 mile. It lies 12 fathoms, which is 72 feet, northeast near big trees under stone. So there's your treasure map with these rivers on it. The map was passed down through the generations of the Kennedy family. One of the relatives got the treasure bug in the 1800s or so and came over and tried to find the treasure, but he didn't know the coastline well enough to tell where the river was, where the X was. And he tried and tried for a while, ended up getting odd jobs to try and support himself. But then he finally was ready to give up and head back to England. And he left it with the lady who was running his lodging, who was named Emmeline Benner Lewis, and she was in New Hampshire. And he left and told her that, you know, he wanted her to keep it safe, which he did quite well. She had a prying little nephew named George Benner. George always wanted to get in the box where the treasure map was and see what was in there. And this went on for about 20 years. And finally, Emmeline decided that Kennedy wasn't going to be returning. And she allowed George to open the box and look at the map. George was pretty good with his rivers. He was Boston born and bred. He could tell right away it was the Kennebec River. So he and a similar-minded friend in about 1930 headed up north, also stayed in Booth Bay Harbor. They rented a sloop. The first day they went up the Kennebec. They found the likely looking cove. Following the map, they found a large rock that was encrusted with quartz, which was the quartz boulder described in the map. And they brought the top in line, and they noticed the two trees, the big trees as described, but there was only one, so they couldn't quite figure out what was going on. It was getting dark, so they headed back to Booth Bay Harbor again, spent the night there, and then got out the next morning, went back to the location, and this time they took a bearing off the quartz rock and headed up to the tree that they saw, the only tree they could find. And near it, they found a second tree had been chopped down. So they found that stump there. So using a crowbar, they started prodding through the earth, looking for evidence of possible hidden treasure. And sure enough, they found 2 boxes of hidden treasure. And included in this treasure was allegedly this gold cross, the same gold cross that Black Bart Roberts would have worn. Now, supporting this story are the fact that Emmeline Benner Lewis and George Benner, we located records on them. They both proved to be alive. We even contacted members of the family who were not quite supportive of the treasure story, but they did in fact exist. We have Morse Cove here that exists as well. And these guys punching in the ground with the crowbar finally found, as I mentioned, those 2 boxes. In the boxes were the cross and a whole bunch of gold coins. And they took the boxes and headed back down to Boston. And according to the story, they cashed them in a bank, and it put George Benner through college back there in those days of the Depression. So it must have been quite a find for him. The thing is that they only found 2 boxes, which meant that there logically are still 2 boxes left somewhere in Morse Cove. Now, I had all this information and I thought it was a mildly interesting story. Didn't give it a whole lot of credence, but I headed off to Morse Cove with my camera to get pictures of the area. It's a really nice area. And what did I locate when I got there? But a bunch of rocks encrusted with quartz, just like the treasure map sort of described. Not a large boulder, and all the geography has changed because this is now the public boat landing for Phippsburg. And this bay you're looking at here is a little north of the major bay. And so I began to think, well, that's a lot of things going together. Who knows? We might have something here, we might not. And that's pretty much how pirate history goes. Here's one of the rocks in grayscale. It shows off the quartz a little bit. And that's one of the reasons I left it in grayscale. But you can go there now. It's open to the public. It's a beautiful place to stop and have a picnic and check out your own quartz boulders. And who knows, maybe you'll find some treasure somewhere. But as I said, there's been so much landscaping done there that treasure is probably buried forever. The boxes are busted open. There's little pieces of it here and little pieces of it there, if indeed it's still there. Now, before we move on to weapons, which is going to be our next subject, I just wanted to quickly clear up the famous Maine story about Captain Kidd and his buried treasure at Deer Island that was apparently discovered by the Astor family and used to build their empire in New York. And this has been a very convincing yarn. I have TV producers calling me on this one all the time. In fact, it's completely false. There was a friend of the Astor family that enjoyed publishing complete falsehoods in small little books that he would print. He would pay for printing them himself. And he is the source of this tale, and there was never any treasure at Deer Island. One of these producers just disregarded what I had to say and went off and found someone who would say the right thing. And I've watched the whole thing on TV on Discovery Channel. It was very interesting, entertaining. But I know Captain Kidd didn't have any treasure in Deer Island. If you Google him, Captain Kidd Treasure Maine, I think you get about 50,000 results. The fact is, and it's pretty well historically kept, Captain Kidd never made it as far north as Maine. He would have been in New York because he lived there, but prowling around in Maine was not Captain Kidd's bailiwick at all. So all the Captain Kidd stories out the window. There's a few more in the book that I debunk as well. Okay, pirate weapons and tactics. These are examples of some pirate swords, and especially the hilts of these swords. On your left is a rapier. This would have been an elegant gentleman's weapon. This was long, narrow blade, sharpened on two sides. It was meant to keep people with shorter swords at a distance, so that with flicks of your wrist, you could use that long blade to inflict painful wounds, perhaps even deadly. The other sword there is a little known, but at the time very popular, clamshell hilt sword. And sometimes those clamshells would be on both sides of the sword, and those were obviously used for hand protection. I should mention, by the way, that these come from the collection of George Gray, who is a Camden resident, and he has a really beautiful collection of actual and replica weapons of the pirate period. Next up is what would be called a hanger cutlass. It's a cheap, easy to make sort of cutlass. This is the kind of thing that guys would grab from the wall as they were headed out. And then down there is more of a buckler handguard, a little more protection for you. And you can use it to whack a guy in the face if you need to, with your fist still in it. In grayscale, I did that because it brings out the shape of the blades a little bit more. You can see that we have the clamshell again, we have the buckler, and we have the hanger cutlass. Cutlasses, you can see from these, their trademark is that they have one edge. The top part of the sword is flat. They usually have a little bit of curve to assist with cutting, essentially. And they're essentially a hacking weapon. So very instinctive to use. You would simply raise them up and bring them down somewhere near your victim's collarbone, and that would deflect the blade into the neck. You could also thrust it. The swords were also made short. The reason for this is that ships have booms, rigging, all kinds of things. And in the 'tween decks, it's even lower. So it's very hard to use a long sword on a ship. And that's why the cutlass was so popular. The rapier, well, it might have been popular with gentlemen. It might have been fun on shore. Not very effective on a ship. These are flintlock pistols that were used during the pirate period. On top is a standard flintlock. In the middle is a wheel lock. We have close-ups of these I'll be taking you on. And down at the bottom is what's called a dog lock. And we start here with the flintlock. And this was the thing that was adapted. It is the latest version and sort of the final version of flintlock weapons. It is composed of the hammer, you can see, that has a flint Stone Age weapon affixed to it. And then the thing you see up is called the frizzen. And that goes down over a thing called the flash pan. which is where the powder ignites, goes into the barrel, and discharges the weapon. I'm going to be demonstrating loading a flintlock pistol later on, so I won't go into too much detail with that right now. This is a wheel lock. This is the oldest model. You can see they used a wheel to hold the hammer in place once they lifted it up, and then a standard trigger to release that, bringing the flint down onto a pan and discharging the weapon. And this is a dog lock, so-called because of the dog device, which you can see at the rear of the lock, the metal work there. And that was used to hold the hammer up. The problem with the wheel lock and the dog lock is they were very easy to discharge accidentally, while the flintlock had things built into it that would make it harder to discharge accidentally. So that was one of these the reason these weapons became outmoded and essentially replaced by a standard flintlock. More pirates in Maine. These are reenactors. These reenactors are with the Dark Rose Pirates. They're headquartered right there in Camden, Maine. They do generally, on years when there isn't pandemic diseases running around, they generally do shows all the way over Maine, and they go down to Key West, North Carolina, and a whole bunch of other places. You may have seen them at Camden Windjammer Days. This year, they will be at Booth Bay Harbor Windjammer Days. And I'm not sure what's happening with Camden Windjammer Days, but they do have a website if you want to follow them and see where they end up. They travel, with the 57-foot gaff rig yawl, which you can see in this picture here. This is a working vessel, and it also is armed with 6 cannon that they discharge at times. They also have field artillery, or artillery that is used in the field. They do have an actual field piece. What you're looking at here is a naval gun that's been converted for use in the field. And they go through training so that they're qualified to discharge these weapons. And you can see this gentleman here is discharging the weapon downriver towards the approaching pirate ship. And here is a view of a bunch of pirates of all shapes and sizes taking over the twin villages of Damascata and Newcastle. This was part of an event, a past event called the Pirate Rendezvous that was there. Pirate Rendezvous has since discontinued. There are bubblings of it coming back up. But in this, everyone sort of playfully took over the town. It was a fundraiser for a children's Christmas fund. And it was kind of great to see all the little kids that you see there having fun and raising money for a children's Christmas fund. And among these scalawags, if you look at the center of this picture, you might notice the fellow there with the cutlass and the big hat and the red sash looks a lot like me. But I'm not talking any more about that without my attorney present. The book itself, Pirates and Lost Treasure of Coastal Maine, it is available online if you want to get it direct from me. At redcloaktours.com/store/. And the ordering system has a way that you can request an autograph and or an inscription of any kind you like. If you like using phones, for the old-fashioned folks, we have a phone as well that we can do business on. It's not a landline phone though, it's a cell phone. So that's available for you there as well. And you also feel free to call me with any questions or comments you may have after this. I'm more than happy to take that on. And Julie, if you want to, we can switch over back to with me on the screen.
Sure, you can just go ahead and hit the little stop share button, which should be red on your screen, maybe towards the top where that toolbar was.
I use the phone. Okay, flintlocks. This is a replica of an English sea service pistol. You can see that the barrel is coated with brass to reduce corrosion and things like that. It's a working replica, so it does fire. We're not going to be discharging it with any powder in it today. It's a nice indoor day and we don't want to do that kind of thing. We actually set off the smoke detector in a hotel once, demonstrating the weapons without any ball, but with powder. So how do you load these things? First of all, you need powder. Here's a powder flask you can use to measure the powder. Use this device to let the powder in, pour it out like that, and then close it back up. And now you've got a measure of powder in there. You add that, whoops, add that to your weapon, which of course I'm not really doing. And then take your ramrod, which is kept with the weapon here, and take a lead ball or whatever you're going to be shooting. Usually it's a lead ball adjusted for the caliber of this barrel. Sometimes people will take a small piece of oiled cloth to go down there as well to sort of seat the ball. And you take all that and tamp it down real well here in your barrel, which would look a lot like this. Replace your ramrod. And now you have to prime the weapon as well. And that is done here. This is there's a flash pan and the frizzen that I mentioned before in the photograph. And then here's the hammer with the flint on it. So first you would set your weapon on half cock. Half cock was one of those advantages that the wheel lock and the dog lock didn't have. Your weapon can't go off on half cock. There comes the saying, don't go off half cock. So this makes the weapon a lot safer to load and a lot safer to handle once it's loaded. I often just use standard powder to put into the flash pan here, which would look a little bit like this. There is, some people use a special powder, a little bit lighter, a little more ignitable. And so that's done as well. I understand we might have some Rev War reenactors out there who are all of them very good flintlock users. Then you would lower your frizzen. This seals the powder inside this little area where the flash pan is and keeps the elements out and all that kind of thing. Normally you would want to keep this on half cock until you used it. And then when you're ready to use it, you would pull it back on full cock, making sure there's nothing standing in front of this, because unloaded weapons should be treated just like loaded weapons. And then now let's see if this discharges. Hopefully what we have is the flint hits the frizzen, creates a spark, which would cause the weapon to discharge. There we go. Boom. Now that you've done that, what's it good for? Well, they're made to be good clubs as well. You can also block a sword stroke with this, so that now you get your sword out and you're able to block a sword stroke. It's not enough time really to load this again in battle. It is said that some people can reload a flintlock 4 times a minute. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. 2 times a minute would be pretty good. And one of the things that pirates were shown to do in illustrations, and it was recently proven with a pistol found at the wreckage of the Weta in Massachusetts, is they would take 2 of these, run a ribbon on them, and hang them from their neck, up to 4, 6 guns at once, all hanging from their neck, both sides. So they were able to easily bring them up, discharge them, bring up another one, discharge it, and then drop it back down, and it'd still be hanging right on your neck there. They found a pirate pistol with a little bit of ribbon that was still attached to its trigger guard down here. So that would indicate that the illustrations were in fact correct, and pirates did do this kind of thing. Okay, with loading the flintlock, we're ready for questions and answers. And I'm ready to go whenever you are, Julie.
Perfect. And yes, I can verify. I worked at Fort Western, and having shot flintlocks myself, and you know, unfortunately not so many pistols, but Brown Besses and stuff, they don't load very quickly. That's some hard stuff to do. Anyhow, yeah, some of you out there who attend programs might not know that I can shoot cannons and flintlocks. Anyhow, let's go back to the beginning. I'll scroll through the chat. If anyone has any questions for Greg, you can go ahead and type them into the chat right now, and I will read them aloud. We had someone who joined us a little bit late. It was right when you were going over some of the Dixie Bull reenactor and telling the stories about Dixie Bull. And you had showed a photograph of a reenactor, and this gentleman, Steve, wanted to know if it was Jim Nelson.
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
AKA James Nelson. When I'm contractually obligated to address him that way because that's his written name. But yeah, he's a great guy. Went to UCLA Film School, actually crewed the Golden Hind through the Panama Canal from California.
Cool. We have Mary who says, great presentation. And she wants to know any news on activity around Monhegan.
Yes. When I spoke earlier of Black Sam Bellamy's fleet coming up here and in order to meet. And one of the captains, Nolan, went to Damascove Island. Another one of the captains, Paulsgrave Williams, went to Monhegan. I have a feeling Williams looked at Monhegan and saw a harbor he could get in and out of two different ways. Now the bottom there is cobbly, so he might have had to put his anchors on shore, but that is where he decided to go. And then even while at Monhegan, he was piratical, and he sent an open boat with 8 guys, like a little rowboat, maybe with a little sail, over to Machias, or not Machias, Matinicus Island. And they raided there. All they were able to take was canvas and compasses and things like that. There wasn't much there, but being pirates, that's what they did. And I'm not sure I'd want to take a rowboat from Monhegan to Machias, even on a good day. Now, in terms of other pirates that might have visited Monhegan, I think we can assume that there were. We used the well-documented stuff about Black Sam Bellamy to sort of prove beyond a reasonable doubt they were there, but it was an obvious stop. I'll just put it that way. For anyone in the area, it was a very obvious stop.
All right, thanks. Vanna says, when pirates came up from the Caribbean, what kinds of products were they bringing for exchange or commerce?
Depends on how lucky they got. In the early days, when there was a lot of Spanish activity and the Spanish were shipping goods from Manila through Panama and then through the Caribbean and back to Spain, you could take a pirate galleon or a Spanish galleon full of really valuable treasure if you had the opportunity. That would have been in the 1600s. Back in the 1700s, a lot of ships carried cash on board to pay people or for items that they were paid for. And then there was freight of all kinds. So you never knew what you were going to get once you got on board that ship. It could be salted cod. It could be bales of cotton or sugar or molasses or rum, or you just had to find out. And sometimes there was a little torture involved in getting the captain to divulge where he had hid the cash somewhere on the ship. So that was also part of it. Black Sam Bellamy, when he was coming up after one season of raiding in the Caribbean, and he had a fairly large fleet of ships, had 4.5 tons of treasure on board. And that treasure included coins as well as jewels, as well as other stuff that he could trade for cash.
Okay. So speaking of raiding and approaching other ships and did pirates really actually fly like a black flag or, the skull and crossbones, or were they a little sneakier with their presence?
No, they weren't sneaky at all. They wanted to scare the bejeebers out of the people on the merchant vessels so that they would surrender easily. They actually flew both flags. In the earlier days, they were simply a red flag or a black flag. I believe the black flag meant no quarter given. We're going to kill y'all. Oh. And the red flag was turn to or we will attack you. And then because the pirate ships had lots of pirates on board, they would get over and face the ship and do what's called vaporing. So now you had all these unwashed, mean-looking pirates with swords and pistols and all kinds of stuff right up on the side of the deck, and they're all screaming and yelling and calling you names. And most people really didn't put up much of a fight after that. And the pirates were selective about attacking ships that weren't well armed or well manned.
Yeah, I would have been terrified if somebody like that pulled up next to me, for sure.
Now, just to add on a bit, in terms of the skull and crossbones,
yeah,
that did come on. It's sort of a universal death sign. But a lot of pirates had their very own version of their flag, so that you would know if it was Blackbeard attacking you.
Oh, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, and then Blackbeard would use that reputation he gained to scare people into submission. It may be of note that there's no recorded murders by Blackbeard during any of his piratical capering. He just scared everybody to death.
Oh,
It wasn't until the final battle with Robert Maynard that casualties were incurred.
interesting. Okay, so Donna asked an interesting question. Is there a pirate population currently living in Maine similar to the witch population residing in Salem, Massachusetts?
Well, I'll tell you what, we've done reenactments in Eastport and many of other places where we meet a lot of fishermen. And a lot of those fishermen say, we're the pirates of today.
Ah,
So there is that type of pirate population. I understand from historical records of the police departments around here, this was a smuggler's coast, still is a smuggler's coast. And there was a lot of smuggling going on in some of these coves, especially back when drugs and all that kind of thing were a little more popular on the illegal side. So no, I would say they're not out taking Spanish galleons or other ships, but there's still people that are on the water performing illegal activities or just not playing by any rules.
of course. Susan asks, what are your thoughts about Oak Island?
I think that they have really made that show go on for quite a while. Nonetheless, I still watch it, hoping that this will be the time they finally come up with the treasure. There is a lot of, there's sort of two ways to look at Oak Island. If you're the complete skeptic, you can allege that they're salting the island with these artifacts to keep their show going.
Of course.
Salting meaning placing artifacts in areas where you locate them and say, oh, this is a discovery. But from what I've seen, there's enough evidence there that there was a lot going on and early on. And all I can say is we're just going to have to see how that plays out. Maybe this season we'll find something. There's certainly a lot of compelling evidence to indicate that there was something going on and there may still be something there.
Okay, Vanna wants to know, what about slavery? When they came up from the Caribbean, did they bring any people of African descent?
Yes, but in several ways. Pirate crews were all very international. Anyone could join a pirate crew as long as they could handle their weapons and contribute. And the share-outs were actually almost equal. At the end of the voyage, pirates would get full shares, and a regular crew would get full shares. Skilled people like carpenters and surgeons would get a share and a quarter, and the captain would get a share and a half. And many of the pirate ships voted their captains in or out. An armed society is a polite society, so they were very polite, better than a sword fight. Of course, there were a lot of pirate captains out there that were absolute psychos, so that doesn't go for everyone. So I'm go back to the question.
Oh, the question was, so were there slaves? She said, what about slavery? When they came up from the Caribbean, did they bring any people of African descent?
They brought many people of African descent as equal share crew members, part of the crew. There wasn't any problem with that kind of thing. However, when the pirates would capture slave ships that already had slaves on board, some of those pirates would then take the slaves and they were considered chattel and auction them like many other people were doing, unfortunately, at the time. Okay. Kind of a funny story on the side. Blackbeard captured a slaving vessel, which were favored by the pirates because they were fast and they didn't have any walls inside of them. So it was easy to move things forward and aft. They didn't have any bulkheads. And renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge. This was a French ship with a French crew and a load of African slaves on board. And Blackbeard, according to the reports, left the white French crew and all of the slaves freed from their shackles, dropped them off at an island in the Caribbean with, quote, 30 tons of beans to provide them. And I'm sure there's a whole novel that yet to be written about what happened on that island afterwards.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so I think this is a great question to end on. Jonathan and Christina say, in the event that treasure is found in Maine, what sort of, quote, finders keepers regulations come into play?
You're asking the wrong guy. You probably need to ask an attorney that kind of question. I know that with the advent of metal detectors, there are certain restrictions from states, counties, and private landowners and things like that that would prevent or cause a share to be shared, that kind of thing. Generally, the state gets a cut of some kind. The other thing you can do is ferret it away. hop on a boat, sail away, and not tell anyone about it. Sort of like the people did in Machias with that pot of things they found.
And then you'll feel like a real pirate.
Yeah, then you are a real pirate. You could be a fugitive from the law as well.
We did have one more question come in, and I don't know
Sure.
if you're going to answer this one because who gives away their locations for gold? But Susan says, "I've heard of gold coins being found occasionally on Monhegan. Are there other locations near Camden where coins have been found?"
Not that I'm aware of, and quite frankly, I'm not aware of the ones in Monhegan. But that is not out of Maine has hundreds of years of history, very much like Oak Island. I mean, you're standing on history. People lose coins. So you never know where you're going to find a coin. And many of the coins in those days were gold because it was that was the standard.
So everyone needs to be asking for metal detectors for their next birthday present. And Mother's Day is coming soon. So speaking of great things to buy, I highly recommend you all check out Greg Latimer's book. Once again, that can be found on is it the Red Cloak Tours website? Yep,
redcloaktours.com/store/.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Greg. This has been a lot of fun and very, very interesting. Thank you all for coming tonight. We do these talks all the time. Most Tuesday and Thursday evenings, we're talking about something, and we've got a load of great presentations coming up in May. You can find out all about them by visiting librarycamden.org. Check it out on our calendar. If you see anything you like, send me an email and I'll send you a link. All right. Yes, we're getting some lovely comments. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Greg, I agree. Have a wonderful evening and thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.